Welcome to Transformers, a program designed specially for HR professionals to discuss various topics within the industry and also to showcase certain HR practices that they have in their organizations. Today we have a special person, an old friend and a special person from HR, Udayan Dutt, Director HR, Unilever Sri Lanka. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
We've been talking conventional HR topics so far. I had to have a special person to discuss a special topic, virtual offices. Here we are in this world, we are so used to the stereotype office. And without that, we don't know what to do. I wonder, what would the future office environment be? That would be a nice starting point for our discussion.
Yeah, and thanks Niroshan for calling me over and engaging on this exciting topic. And it is indeed something that captures my imagination, because I too think that what would the world really look like from an organization lens in even say the next decade or so, and or maybe even sooner, because clearly today we are looking at different forms of engagement. When I say that, I think very soon we are already looking at ways in where people are doing part-time jobs. People want to engage with you on a half job because they want to leave and do something else. People are looking at sabbaticals, then coming back. There are concepts of flexi time, agile working, work from home, and all these which are coming through. And I'm sure along with this at some point in time, there would be an area which would evolve, which would be this thing about what the workspace would look like. And when I say workspace, I mean what the physical workspace would look like, what would be, the virtual world, or the social work ethic that exists. Because when you look at an organization, we say it's all about people, but it's all about people who come together. And even today, a large part of our organization identity is defined by what is the office, where is the office, what does the office look like, what are the facilities in the office. Absolutely. And then when we go there, we socialize. It's like a world in itself. And then there are identities that get created based on the size of the workstations, where do they sit, who do they sit next to. There are strategies that get discussed on open plan versus closed doors, on functions sitting with the business versus sitting in a functional silo. So, it's a lot of, there is again a lot of art and science that goes behind this. One can almost say it's an element of organization design in the literal sense. But as we evolve and as we move through, it would be fascinating to see, because clearly if there's somebody who's working 3 days of the week with an organization because he or she wants to do something else on the other 4 days of the week, their requirements of a workspace would be very different.
Sure.
Yeah. If you have a person who comes in and wants to work as an individual contributor in an industry and in a company which allows that, and wants to work only specific hours of the day, because he or she has other commitments, could be related to family or otherwise, the requirements would again be different. And simply speaking, I think even commercially, as companies grow, become bigger, start employing more people, start engaging more people, the day might not be far where having an office space that can physically accommodate everybody under one roof could become a difficult thing to do. Everywhere space is a constraint. Colombo is no different, Sri Lanka is no different. As companies are becoming global, that itself is lending to it. All of us know about, I'm sure, of at least one person who works with an organization and is sitting in a remote location, is probably working out of home.
Okay.
Right. So when you just put all of these together, it's a cocktail, right? And who knows where it would lead to.
Yes.
But it is something that is fascinating, and I would say requires as much introspection and insight from the HR professionals and from the leadership teams as much as any of the others.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that as much as we will think this is an imaginary thing, it's happening right now.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And there are, of course, the pluses and minuses of this whole process, like there will always be. But if you were to move away from the conventional office, what are the pluses and minuses that come to mind?
So I would say first and foremost, it like you said rightly, that it's actually happening. And I think first and foremost, all of us also have a definition of a personal space within office.
Okay.
And we have our own work area, we have our own team, we have our own little space, we have our favorite place in the cafeteria where we want to sit at a particular time in the day, and so on and so forth. I think that will be something which will undergo a change. Okay. And I think it will also go hand in hand with the evolution, I would say, of media and how people engage on social platforms. So today, I would say the need to have face-to-face engagements with people has changed dramatically. I can't say it's gone down, and I don't want to say it's better or worse, because I consider it as part of human evolution, but it's definitely changed. I think, I was just jokingly telling somebody that let's say a decade ago, we couldn't have imagined that you could have had a video conference with just a handheld device, but today all devices are capable of doing so in terms of the phone that we have in our pockets. And when that happens, along with things like WhatsApp and Viber and all the other social mediums that people might be using, WeChat, etc., that will ultimately come into office space and the way people engage at work as well. So I think that need for a personal space would pretty much get redefined, because I don't think the physical space is any longer the only gamut or realm of personal space. It's also the virtual space that you have, and really that may become the reality. The second is, in my view, would be in terms of a positive, and what the change would be the flexibility, and therefore by need the agility that would increase in organizations, because oftentimes the walls, the physical infrastructure can become very definitive and can give the impression. So when you have the fluidity and you have the need to be flexible and the need to be agile because of a lack of space, physical space, I think that will force organizations and people within to work in a more innovative way and find solutions which are long term, okay, and yet effective in that sort of an environment. I feel that would be the starting point, and then who knows where it grows into.
From an HR perspective, being able to have checks and balances on work,
exactly,
and the self-discipline on the part of the individual, this becomes very, very important.
Oh yes, and along with that, I would say teamwork, because we do a lot of work as HR professionals on teamwork, whether it's through training programs, whether it's through leadership interventions. Yeah. I mean, you're a leading guru on that, and I'm sure a lot of work that you do with your clients also ultimately does touch the aspect of working together in a team. Absolutely. Right, in whichever context or forum that may be. But clearly that again talks about having to work physically together. Now, I think it would really shake the very foundation of what HR has been doing. Because driving culture would mean a different thing. Yeah. The definition of culture itself would become very different, right? In terms of what it means. Because clearly, if one were to imagine an organization where people are sitting virtually and working towards the same end, the cultural requirements would be very different than what it would be for the same set of people to be sitting together and doing that work.
Absolutely. But then, is it the youngsters? I mean, is it the millennials? Is it the generational thing that all this tech savviness is now creating this in HR as well? Is it that?
I would say yes and no. I would say yes, because yes, they are the ones who would adapt and look at this much more easily. That would be the general impression. And the reason why I say no is because you might be surprised that a lot of people in the older generation also may take to it very well, and may not have done it thus far just because of the lack of options to do so. Okay. And I think it's as the life changes and lifestyle changes, it will happen across generations. If you look at an organization like ours, where we've been in existence for over 150 years, or 125 years, we've been in Sri Lanka for over 75 years. If I really look at it, we've got people from at least 4 generations today working. You've got the baby boomers who are working, you've got Gen X, you've got Gen Y, and now you've got the millennials who are working, right? Yeah. All under one roof. Do I necessarily find that the aspirations and the requirements of each generation is very unique and homogeneous within that and extremely different between? I don't think so. I think that today people are making their choices. People's liberties are very different, and therefore, along with that comes this time where it will move across generations, and you might have people even in the younger generation who would prefer order, want to come into an office, want to work, not feel much more comfortable if there's a physical engagement. Whereas there could be people of a much older generation who we all know can take to Facebook and same time or FaceTime, etc., and really enjoy it.
Absolutely. I think all baby boomer grandparents certainly enjoy the company of
The
their
Skype
grandchildren.
and exactly over Skype, and especially where we are all today sitting in a world where we are all moving places.
Yes.
And so clearly, I would say from a family perspective, gone are the days where one was born in a city, got bred in a city, and really lived his or her own life there.
Absolutely.
And the world is everybody's canvas. So from a family perspective, and if you can change so much, I think work will automatically follow.
Yes. I asked you that question because many of the older cynics would turn around and say, yeah, technology comes in, we go into it, and afterwards we then go back to a more human touch kind of thing because that works.
Yeah.
And you're right, probably some of the older generations might actually take to it much more.
Yeah. No, I mean, nothing can, it's not technology. I don't think if one were to not view technology as something that replaces human touch, but something that complements it. Because the flip side today is, and if I were to give a personal example, and we were talking about the baby boomer grandparents. So my daughter and son today get to see their grandparents who are in another country and in two different cities in that country on an everyday basis because of technology, which I would say is still being far more intimate than having to write letters which would take 2 weeks to reach and meet only twice in a year or 3 times in a year.
That's right.
So I would say in that case where you have the you bring in what was the old, which is the good thing in terms of a face-to-face, and you supplement and complement it with technology. It's not replacing the connect of one with the other.
Yes. I think all these are things that we believe in, some of the older ways that we're used to. There was a head of HR who I was having a good chat with, and she was saying, well, this virtual learning business, I'm not much into it. And that evening, while her daughter is far away in a different city studying, was chatting to her and cooking together.
Exactly.
And so the mum is cooking here and the daughter is cooking there, different time zone, but they enjoyed a mother and daughter cooking session.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about virtual offices, it's similar.
Exactly. And it, like I said, it will allow people the flexibility in the true sense. Even today, I think the office space and the need to be in that office space is largely, something that creates a certain amount of rigidity to even the flexibility we talk about. So when we say flexible work hours, it's almost like saying, when we are not defining that you are here in office from 9 to 5, but when you are in office, and then you can get out of office and do your own thing. But this is something which can really define it. And like I said, so many of us know people who are today working for other organizations in a particular location and country, and are being as sincere to their jobs and creating impact and results, and not really linked to the fact that they have a physical infrastructure or not.
Are you aware of how we actually measure and manage the work quantum in a practical sense? How do you actually check whether the work is being done, how the deadlines? Well, it's easy in terms of time, but the quality of it, the interaction level of it, people feel you can't have control over people.
Right. And yes, I mean, the amount of discipline that is required, because again, in all fairness, the fact that these systems existed of having an office and of having time checks, of even people punching in, is something which just inculcates discipline. And I think we all learn through it. We all, even in school, we have that right through of following a particular schedule and really adhering to it. So there is definitely a loss of control. And a lot of it will then depend on the personal discipline and the work ethic that the individual has, and also for the organization to define some key parameters and result areas that would be non-negotiable irrespective of whether the person is working in a virtual setup or not. I also would like to add on here that it's not just about, it's not saying that there is an office and then there ain't no office, right? It's not that you have office and then you just take it away. I was giving the example about this in our personal lives. It's probably about having both in a complementary fashion where one optimizes. So one doesn't need to necessarily have an office which sort of serves to the needs of X number of people, but can do with some X minus delta number. But at the same time, work keeps getting done because you have a set of individuals who are working. And in any case, if you look at companies, I would say there are people who are working out there. So in any typical company like an FMCG company, you have a sales force which is out there. So they have been in a virtual working environment in that sense for decades now.
That's right.
Yeah, and the same baby boomer generation and upwards have also worked in that environment, haven't they?
Brilliant.
So it's not it's just about looking at that same concept and seeing how you apply it to a current working environment.
Does HR or is HR supposed to have a demand supply situation and wait for this requirement to come, or do they need to start influencing the senior management of organizations to look into these areas right now?
I think companies would be well served to look at it and really plan ahead for the future, just as they would in other areas. I would say when one looks at an organization, looks at an overall 5-year, 10-year horizon and is drawing up its own plans, this would be a key area that could get some attention, primarily for being able to attract the right kind of talent, and if indeed the aim of the organization is to get bright young talent in, as also to retain the imagination and focus of the people who are already in the organization. It has to be an evolving process. Otherwise, you may end up making yourself even redundant as an organization very soon. So I think it would be good to actually focus on this and really bring in and test concepts, and maybe in a small way which just makes you uncomfortable, but then gives you the opportunity in a very non-threatening way to at least test something out. Yes. Right? And I think HR can take the lead on this, because this will also have, like I mentioned earlier, a commercial angle to it, because as companies grow, I'm sure many leading companies and aspiring companies would be making plans of growing at double digits and wanting to expand their footprint as well. I think HR can play a pivotal role by just questioning the basis of saying, hey, you know what, just because you're expanding to another country doesn't mean you've got to open an office there. Yeah. Okay. So I think it'll be an interesting part, and HR always wants to get opportunities to get into the boardroom and to be in the middle of the business, right? This is, I think, a good place for HR to explore.
Excellent, because whenever you go for a strategic planning process, you see them talking about a 10-year plan. Yeah. But you listen to the content of that which is being discussed. They're extrapolating between time zones of the current situation. Exactly. And they're trying to multiply and see whether in 10 years you can make this amount more. Yeah. Something innovative of how to look at costs. Correct. This might be one of them. Retaining of people, maybe attraction of future talent. All this by a simple idea of trying to look at, well, do we actually need to have this? Exactly. And I think it will clearly put all these questions, and as well as raise some new ones in terms of what sort of IT infrastructure then do I need to enable virtual working. What sort of, like you were saying, checks and balances do I need to put in place to ensure that work doesn't suffer. Sure. It also means that I would say that at some level the organization is actually physically expanding itself into different places. So if you were to imagine almost like a city where you have people working across in different locations, where you don't have control over that location because it is not your exclusive location. Sure. But yet, for whatever it's worth, that person is a representative of your organization sitting there. Absolutely. So it's a fascinating balance of flexibility. And yet the other lens of looking at it is I'm actually expanding myself, and now instead of having one location or X number of locations, I have people sitting across so many different locations. That's right. I mean, recently a guy was asking me, so here you are, Niroshan, you are teaching disruptive innovation to people. So where do you see yourself? What's your blue sky? And I said, someday, if I can stay at home and send a hologram to do my training, I'll be okay.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. And I think
Not impossible.
Yeah, and I think we are very close to it actually, because virtual instructor-led programs are already happening.
Yeah.
I think as the world keeps becoming different and keeps changing, people today are also getting more used to the idea of defining their own pace of learning. So universities are nowadays doing it, right? Where you do virtual programs, you're doing distance programs, and so on and so forth. So it's not long before the organizations will follow suit as well. And I think it just makes it better, because then you can actually reach out to probably the best that there is in the world without necessarily having to spend that sort of money of bringing it in. Yeah. It's there at the flick of a button.
Okay.
So the possibilities are endless, isn't it?
I'll throw in a spanner.
Yeah.
Loyalty. Do you think that with all of these things, when you don't have that connectivity in that car park and that little badge, and as much as we can have a complimentary half and half system, that people will feel less loyal because you're only a click away?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, and I wouldn't overplay or underplay that, because I am also one who believes that an office space can be used very, it can be used very powerfully to create employee engagement. So no two ways about it. You're absolutely right, and there is a certain sense of pride almost we have if we have a great office to go to. Yeah, and it can become an exit barrier for somebody. That if you have a good working environment, you have great offices, you have good facilities in that office. So it may be easier for somebody who's working virtually to be able to do that. So yes, that it will take away, I would say, a potential hook that you have, but at the same time it would force an HR professional or the people looking at the people strategy of that company, starting with the top management, to really make it that much more compelling to want to work in the office. Right. I mean, today if one looks at the leading organizations, and if one were to take any of the rankings, done by the various companies as they do of ranking companies that are aspirational for people to work for, yes, they would almost expect that there's going to be a great office, but nobody wants to work for a company because they have a great office. Yes. And having said that, once they are there, then obviously it creates an additional hook for them. So therefore the other pieces will have to work harder. Sure. In terms of the sense of accomplishment, the identity of that brand, the meaningfulness. People I think look today a lot for, am I working for a company that has a meaning to what it's doing? Does it have a soul? Does it have a set of values? Apart from the usual things in terms of good money and recognition and growth and the rest of it. And those will become stronger. Sure. So I think it's a different challenge, but it's a good challenge to have. Sure.
Do you think that legality, the legal process, can hinder such a thing in an Asian country, or with all our legal processes?
Yeah, I mean, and that's where I think, there has to be a balance. I don't think people will wait for the laws to change before they do that. For example, in at least all the South Asian countries that I have been in, there is still some form of an Establishments Act or a Factories Act or a Shops and Establishments Act which clearly defines work timings. But in many contexts today, companies have moved away from work timings and are giving flexi-time options and so on and so forth. So I think, yes, there will be, and clearly for legality purposes, what one looks at is a registered office, which does not necessarily need to be the one where somebody is based. But I think there would be evolutions of that, but they will go hand in hand, and of course one will have the lawmakers taking the decision looking at all parameters, and they have a much wider spectrum to look at and consider rather than just one organization.
Sure.
So I'm sure they will give that the due thought and evolve.
I'm probably talking from the viewpoint of pure virtual offices, not necessarily the half and half.
Right.
But the half and half will always be there. But the next question is, if it was purely virtual with a head office, do you think that the HR services, those moments where we can care for people, observe, counseling, all that kind of thing, the stress management, where we actually observe, we help each other, that little piece gets negated?
Yeah, so I would look at, if one were to say a pure virtual working setup, I still think that we have a lot to evolve before we can move into a space where a company of a few hundred people is all virtual and doesn't have a physical workspace to connect back on, or a physical infrastructure to connect back on to. But having said that, if you have, I would say, imagine a situation where a company is a company with aspirations of growing into different countries. It may end up having a person sitting in a country working in a virtual office setup, where you don't necessarily need to set up office. And that's the example I've been talking about right through. In that context, yes, the support that you're talking about, and here I'd make a little difference and actually say that in any case, the emotional support that a person gets in office, in my view, is more driven by the person's immediate line organization, be it a boss, be it a subordinate, or be it a peer, rather than the HR department. The HR department can be a facilitator in it, right? And in this situation where you have one person who's sitting away, the flip side is that you can actually give individualized attention, and that's where some of the challenges will be for the HR teams to go ahead, because clearly today and in the days to come, I don't foresee HR being able to sustain itself by having broad brush, one size fits all sort of practices, and it will have to be customized, specialized to different employee groups, and this will be one of them, of people who are working virtually.
Absolutely. If you were to give some advice as a closing remark to HR people with regard to this process of re-looking at workspace, let's call it that more than virtual.
Yes.
What would they need to look at?
So, if I were to think of how I would look at this, first and foremost, I would just stay closely connected with people who are, the game changers, so to say, whether it's the younger generation, whether it's the older generation who's doing this, whether it's organizations which are looking at this differently, because there's some work which is happening, and I would really learn a lot from them. So that's something that I would encourage everybody to do, is almost, you have to have that inquisitiveness to want to go and pick out as much as you can from different scenarios. That would be one. The second would be to really look at what's out there in the form of technology. And one doesn't need to become a geek, but it's always good to know what the trends are, because a large part of it will be led by technology.
Yes.
Yeah. And finally, last but not the least, would be to really check on where these models have worked successfully, and really even look back. And that's why I gave the sales example, that we talk of virtual offices as being new, but I'm talking about a working system which has existed probably for the last 50-70 years, if not more, where people are working virtually. So I'm actually giving a counterpoint, saying, hey, you know what, this is not really new.
That's right.
So really going back into history and seeing what works out there, and don't just throw the baby with the bathwater, or think that, hey, it's all old-fashioned there and now I'm trying to come up with a new thing. I think there's lots to learn from legacy and heritage.
Absolutely. Boot salesman that used to go door to door long years, hundreds of years ago.
Absolutely.
Since you travel a lot,
yeah,
have you seen such offices, something that has inspired you, a story that you've seen? Can you draw a mental picture, if so?
Yeah,
what does it look like?
For me, and that's why I said that it's not 50, it's not full, but I have seen scenarios where one is, in places where there is huge pressure, and it simply starts with that. It's after all a company which has to make money.
Yes.
So it is as simple as real estate is really expensive. I have, pick a number, 100 people working, but I can only afford an office for 50. So I'm going to take an office for 50 people, and the first 50 who hit the workstation are actually going to get to work, and the next 50 then can work from home. That's one. The second place where I'm saying, when I say virtual workspace, I'm saying your workspace is not exclusively your own. I think classically today can be seen in BPOs, stroke call centers, where you've got shift after shift coming and working on the same floor. So you would have somebody working on that workstation for 3 different shifts, right? And 3 different sets of people working there. So I think it's right there and now as far as that particular thing is concerned. Even looking at organizations which have high turnover, just because that's the way the industry is. Yeah. So if you have 30% turnover sort of a scenario, because of the nature of the industry, is again something where there's just so much churn that they're constantly on the move, and I think I've seen that. I think it's fascinating because clearly you need technology to be at a very high level of evolution in that, and a high level of, when I say evolution, not in terms of having the fanciest technology, but having technology reach out to everybody and get accepted by everybody. So I think that's a must. And that's something that I've seen in these organizations. So clearly, one looks at them and almost marvels as to how, it's like a floating workspace, and
Yes.
people are just moving around. So
Excellent. When we picked subjects to discuss at Transformers, we picked subjects on HR and the traditional subjects of HR. And this particular area that we're talking about is a strategic HR thing that will benefit organizations, generations, and of course the future is as well. Udayan, thank you so much for being with us.
thank you.
This was a wonderful session that we had. Thank you very much. Udayan Dutt, Director HR, Unilever, Sri Lanka. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.